What's going on, guys? Dare here with fantasy football advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, week 16 wide receiver start and sits. It's championship weekend. Everything's on the line. All the hard work leads up to this point. If you've made it this far, you've probably stacked up some sort of money already, so congratulations on that. But this is what we've been playing for all season long. Making the correct start and sit decision is going to be vitally important. So, currently our website is free to access for all of the rankings and models available. It has been for the entire playoffs and will continue to be for week 16. So if you want to access that, you can at thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that, as always, in the description box below. We do have a lot of matchups to go over, so we are going to hop right into it. There's no Thursday game slate, but there is 3 games on Saturday. The first game of the Saturday slate is Texans versus Buccaneers, which has a massive 49.5 projected total, even with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin already ruled out. Brashad Perriman is going to gain the most on the Buccaneers side. He had 3 touchdowns on 6 targets last week, 5 receptions, and without those 2 top receivers on the team, his role is looking to increase even more from there. We have him ranked currently as wide receiver 21, and if you own him, there are a lot of receivers that we would start him over. The Texans are only favored by 3, so they still are expecting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to be scoring plenty of points in this game, and through the air, the main receiver would be Brashad Perriman, wide receiver 21. We're comfortable with that. And OJ Howard, you could start him as a low-end tight end 1 as well. On the other side of the ball for the Texans, Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins land on one of the best matchups for the fantasy playoffs, especially week 16. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have ranked 30th in passing yardage allowed and 27th in receiving touchdowns allowed. So expect both of those receivers to have very good games. In fact, Hopkins we have ranked as the wide receiver 2 on the week, and Will Fuller is just outside the top 15. Moving into the next matchup, we have the Buffalo Bills versus the Patriots, and not a lot of offense is expected in this game. The Patriots offense has not been looking as smooth as it has in previous seasons around this time of year, and the Bills defense is one of the harder defenses that they've had to face recently. The only receiver we can realistically start in here for New England is going to be Julian Edelman. We even had to knock him down just due to the lack of potential scoring upside that there is in this specific matchup, coupled with the fact that it's a bad defensive matchup when it comes to receiving production. For Buffalo, John Brown, Cole Beasley, they're both potential flex options. We would trust John Brown more in the flex this week as opposed to his typical ranking of a wide receiver 2. His day will mostly be matched up against Stephon Gilmore, which doesn't present a whole ton of upside and increases his risk even more than it usually is. And Cole Beasley, his string of solid performances did come to an end, catching just 1 ball for 6 yards, no score, and that was against a defense that's not as strong as New England. The last time they faced, Beasley did have 13 targets and was the main focal point in this offense. However, he is a high-risk flex play, and we can't trust him in week 16 any more than that. But moving into the final Saturday game, we have the Rams versus the 49ers. It does have some seeding implications for the playoffs, so we expect both teams to come in fully prepared. San Francisco 6.5-point favorites at home, which would indicate a positive passing game script for the receivers on the Rams. Keep in mind though, 49ers is a tough defensive matchup. Robert Woods though, too hot to sit. Even in a tough matchup against Dallas, where the production wasn't there, he still did get 9 targets. Cooper Kupp, who did outperform him, only had 6 targets. So Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, both wide receiver 2s. Robert Woods, a high-end wide receiver 2. Cooper Kupp, a mid-grade wide receiver 2. And on the other side of the ball, we have Sanders and Deebo Samuel, both of which are in the wide receiver 3 range, completely comfortable flexes, ones that do have upside. It's not a positive passing game script considering that they are heavy favorites at home, but Deebo Samuel can do a lot with very little volume, and Emmanuel Sanders has been the main target in the passing game when it comes to a volume perspective, so both are fine starts as a wide receiver 3 or an upside flex, and you don't need me to tell you George Kittle is an auto start. So let's move into the Sunday games, and the first one we're going to start with is Jacksonville versus Atlanta. Atlanta is a 7-point favorite at home in a game that does have a pretty high projected total. Austin Hooper hasn't really bounced back to his old form as of yet, but he has faced 2 tough defenses against the tight end position, so we have no problem with you starting him as a mid-grade tight end 1. Calvin Ridley, as we know, out for the season. Julio Jones is going to be your main man, and last week versus San Francisco, he had 20 targets, 13 receptions for 134 yards with 2 touchdowns, so massive upside with Julio Jones right now being the only man in town. Russell Gage is another player that they they have been relying on, but this is the fantasy playoffs. We're not touching Russell Gage. For Jacksonville, D.D. Westbrook, at the time of recording, looks to be the only receiver that they'll have in this contest that has some actual fantasy value. Still temper expectations with him. Last week, Emmanuel Sanders and Deebo Samuel were very limited in production. Even if Atlanta does run up the score and it's a good passing game script late, the upside is still capped and the risk level is still high. Ravens versus Browns. This one's going to be in Cleveland. Baltimore right now is on a complete tear. We're starting Marquise Brown. We're starting Mark Andrews. Just keep in mind with Marquise Brown though, he is still going to need the big play to pay off, but he's always going to be a threat to score and one of the higher upside flexes. For Cleveland, Odell Beckham led the team in targets last week. He caught 8 of 13 for 66 yards. Meanwhile, Jarvis Landry only caught 5 of 8 targets. We wouldn't necessarily say this is a changing of the guard when it comes to which receiver we would start over the other. We're still taking Landry, but we're dropping both in the rankings. This team does seem a bit dysfunctional, just even more in the way for them than there already was. Jarvis Landry we still have as a back-end wide receiver 2. However, Odell Beckham, he's a wide receiver 3. So if you're loaded at wide receiver, we can understand starting somebody over him. That's going to do it for this matchup though. We're hopping over to the Saints versus the Titans in one that has an astounding projected total of 50.5 points, which is surprising typically for a Tennessee Titans game. Unsurprisingly, A.J. Brown continues to rise in the rankings after yet another good performance last week. He has now officially cracked wide receiver 1 rankings. He's our wide receiver 11 this week, and there is plenty of upside with the start. 50.5 projected total. The projected team total is still high as well, and they're playing at home as underdogs. A.J. Brown himself cracked triple digits yet again, but the most promising part was that his targets increased to his season high of 13. If he gets that type of volume in this week in this matchup, he could be a league-winning type of player, so make sure you get him into your lineup. Jonnu Smith has also been playing well and has been an integral part of this offense from a passing perspective. We still do have him ranked though outside of tight end 1 territory, so even if you have been streaming the position, there's likely better options available for you than Jonnu Smith this week. For the Saints, super simple. We're starting Michael Thomas and Jared Cook as a low tight end 1 option. Up next, we have the Panthers versus the Colts. DJ Moore has been shockingly good this season and is just outside the top 5 for us this week at the receiver position. Curtis Samuel, although he did score last week, he still is a high risk flex play and a lower tiered one at that. So if you have better options, likely look elsewhere. And on the other side of the ball, T.Y. Hilton played in just over 50% of the snaps last week. A disappointing total of just 25 yards and 4 receptions, but the positive news is he had no setbacks and is expected to take on a bigger role next week, making him a better start. Considering we haven't seen it, and just when we think we can trust T.Y., he hurts our lineups, we do still have him ranked as a flex, but Zach Pascal we still do have ranked ahead of him due to safety and volume and his current role in this offense. His ranking will still be that of a flex, but one that has a bit of a higher floor than we saw with T.Y. just a week ago. Bengals versus Dolphins. Miami is a home favorite in this one. Tyler Boyd, he's going to have a higher floor than he typically does, and there's going to be some upside to go along with it. We do have to be realistic, however. He has had 1 reception in 2 out of the last 3 games, and in those games only going for 10 and 16 yards alike. So a mid-grade wide receiver 3, a higher tiered flex, that's where we're going to have him ranked, and we're not starting any other Cincinnati receiver. For Miami, Devontae Parker continues to impress. He should come out and perform at a very high level this week in a very neutral matchup. It may surprise a lot of you to hear this, but we do have him ranked as a wide receiver 1 this week against Cincinnati. No other Miami receiver are we interested in starting, so we're going to hop over to the next one. Steelers versus Jets. Not much to be said. It's got a very low total of just 38 points. There aren't a lot of offensive weapons that we can trust consistently. Starting with the Jets, we have Robbie Anderson and Jamison Crowder. Sam Darnold has been playing pretty decently. We've seen both of these receivers flip-flop in which one's had the better game. So they're both ranked relatively similar into that middle grade flex area. Robbie Anderson a little on the lower end than Jamison Crowder coming off of the 2 touchdown performance, but both completely acceptable starting in your flex position. The upside I would still have to give to Anderson, but the floor and the safety's got to be with Crowder. It is a tough defensive matchup though, with not a lot of points expected to be scored, so temper your expectations a bit. On the other side, Juju Smith-Schuster was ruled out again last week, leaving James Washington as the lead receiving target in this offense. If Juju plays this week, you can start him, and if Juju does not start, James Washington is a viable flex flex option. He had 10 targets last week, 83 yards against a tough Buffalo defense. He could have a repeat or similar performance in week 16. However, he always is going to come with quite a low floor, so keep that in mind. If Juju is starting, remember, we cannot safely start James Washington even in the flex. Giants versus Redskins. Washington finds themselves as favorites in this game, but it's still a good matchup for both offenses, especially at the receiver position. Terry McLaurin, he's just inside the top 20 this week in half-point PPR. Clearly, we're not starting any other receiver outside of him for Washington, but Sterling Shepard on the other side of the ball, he's a high floor flex play. Golden Tate will be in a similar situation. However, I would knock everything down between the floor and the ceiling with him, so he's a much less appealing flex option to me than Sterling Shepard. Darius Slayton, he's the one who we would put in with the most upside, so if you have him, starting him this week in the flex out of the 3 receivers is where we would want to put our money. He's had 3 touchdowns in the past 2 weeks and has showed the upside that he can have with 3 multi-touchdown games and a proven ability to put on triple-digit receiving yard games. On to the afternoon games, and the first one we have is the Lions versus the Broncos. Courtland Sutton, an auto start every week. The volume's there. The quarterback play is inconsistent at times, but they still can get it done even in a game with a very low projected total. Courtland Sutton is a high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 in this matchup, so if you own him, feel confident in the start this week. On the other side of the ball, we know we don't have Marvin Jones here, but we still do have Kenny Golladay and Danny Amendola. Kenny Golladay is a high-end wide receiver 2. It's not a great matchup, and he is coming off of one of his worst performances of the season, but Kenny Golladay is a wide receiver 1, has been a wide receiver 1 throughout this entire season. As for Danny Amendola, the rankings would put him in a flex consideration. However, we think the floor and upside are just too low for us in this matchup. Chargers versus Raiders, and Tyrell Williams and Darren Waller, they produced last week. The team itself didn't get it done, but if you started either one of those players, you likely weren't disappointed. This week, however, it's going to be a different situation for Tyrell Williams. It is technically a revenge game for him, so the upside is always there as well, but as per usual, he's a flex player and one that we wouldn't expect to have a massive performance this week, even coming off of one of his better performances in the last several weeks. Darren Waller, however, he continues to be a high floor option that we can recommend you start every week, and if you have Waller and another top tier tight end, please feel free to utilize our rankings to find out which one of those 2 we would start this week. Waller himself, we have him ranked as tight end 5, so that kind of gives you an idea of exactly how high we are on Waller. For the Chargers, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, at this point both of them are performing and both of them warrant starts. I know Mike Williams was dropped to a lot of benches, but this week if you do need a spot start at the position, maybe he's been riding your bench and you just lost Godwin, well, Mike Williams we have ranked as wide receiver 24. Still nowhere near where we have the ranking of Keenan Allen. He's a top 10 guy, but still both players do have upside. There's Hunter Henry as well, who's an auto start. He has fallen a tad in our rankings just due to the involvement of Mike Williams and his target share going down, but there's no denying that in week 16 you're gonna start one of the better tight ends who's been one of the more consistent tight ends throughout the entire season, that being Hunter Henry. Eagles versus Cowboys, and not really excited about any of the receiving options for the Eagles outside of the tight ends, Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz, but we're really not starting any Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver at all. Goedert and Ertz are both tight end 1s. Goedert the high variance option as a back end tight end 1, and Zach Ertz is a high floor option as a high end tight end 1. But really that's it for Philadelphia. On the other side for Dallas, Michael Gallup and Amari Cooper find themselves in an extremely good matchup this week with plenty of upside. The last time they played, both of them had decent performances. They didn't reach their ceiling, but there's a good chance that they will this week in a game that means quite a bit for both teams involved. Amari Cooper, he's a top 10 option, and Michael Gallup, he's a back-end wide receiver too. Cardinals versus Seahawks. This divisional game has the highest projected total of all of the games this week, and Seattle is a heavy home favorite at 9.5. We still do love the receiving options on the Seattle side because they are facing the Arizona Cardinals, who've been giving it up all season long to the position, but Tyler Lockett, despite all of the claims that he's finally healthy and trending upward when it comes to volume, we still do have to be wary. He is ranked as a wide receiver 2 due to the projected total, and Josh Gordon vacating from the team, opening up just a few more targets, which is all Tyler Lockett needs to have a monster performance. Jacob Hollister at the tight end position, we still love him. He's a mid to back end tight end 1. And DK Metcalf, he's going to be a high end wide receiver 3, back end wide receiver 2. Someone you can feel comfortable putting in your lineup this week against such a soft pass defense. The Cardinals, however, they only have one guy to choose from, that's Christian Kirk. We have him one spot behind DK Metcalf, but Christian Kirk himself does have a solid matchup this week, and we wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if he outperforms DK Metcalf. We're not starting any other Arizona receiver this week, so we'll hop into the final game on Sunday, the Sunday night game, the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Chicago Bears. This one is going to be in Chicago. Kansas City is still a 6-point favorite, so Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, their premier options at the position. There should not be one person leaving these players on the bench, so the only player that's in real consideration on potentially being a lineup starter is Sammy Watkins, who we would safely recommend you to avoid. For Chicago, Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller are both starts this week. Allen Robinson, a top 10 guy at the position. Anthony Miller, proven enough to be a high upside flex play. And in a game where we know Kansas City can certainly rack up the points, there's even more upside for these two receivers in this contest. The final game we have, this one's going to be one of the most exciting Monday Night Football games that we've seen thus far. The Packers versus the Vikings. Huge playoff implications for these teams, so we're hoping to see the best of both of them. Stephon Diggs and Devontae Adams are really the only receivers we're starting. We have dropped Diggs in the rankings a bit from a back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 to more of a back-end wide receiver 2 to fall more in line with the type of production we've been seeing, even in the absence of Adam Thielen. Devontae Adams, he's top 5, and there's no receivers in this game that we're starting outside of Diggs or Adams. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. I can't stress enough, check the rankings. They're available on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that in the description. But if you did like this video, please hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.